Okay, so we have finished our discussion about relativistic theories, and we're about to go into universalist theories. But before we do, I want to talk about tolerance for a second, okay? Because tolerance is one of those things that is really important to us. It's like almost a virtue in and of itself, right? Like we aim to be really tolerant people, at least in this country. Like that's a value we try to hold. And since if somebody says that we're intolerant, that's hurtful, right? We get all defensive and mad and stuff like that, at least for some people. Okay, so the thing is that some people, when they think about tolerance, they think that they have to be relativistic in their moral views in order to be tolerant. And by that I mean, they think that they have to hold the view that more than one moral system is right. Everyone has their own values, and to be tolerant, I'm going to say, good. All of those are good. Okay? This is the idea we often have of tolerance. Okay? Is that, all right, you got yours, I got mine, that's good for you, it's true for me, and there we go. Okay, that's what it means to be tolerant for most people. Okay? So because of that, they think that they just can't, even if they wanted to be a universalist and say, I really do think there's one overarching theory, right? There's one overarching standard of what's good and bad. Even if they wanted to be that, they couldn't, they think, because that wouldn't be tolerant, right? If there's one standard of good and bad, then that means they'd have to tell somebody they were wrong, and that's not tolerant. Does that make sense? So they feel like they're relegated into, well, I have to be a relativist as far as my morals. I mean, pick your poison, right? With any of those relativistic theories we talked about, okay? I have to choose one of those because the only way that I can be tolerant is to be a relativist. Okay, well, I'm going to show you that that's false. Okay, and in fact, I'm going to show you that you cannot be a relativist and be tolerant at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about this. I do this briefly in here because it has a lot to do with morals and because it's a big deal for us. Tolerance is a really big deal for us. Okay, so so let's just talk about this for a second. We've talked. It seems to be valued as an attitude. It seems to be associated with relativistic theories because relativism seems to allow for tolerance. Everybody has their own theory. Everybody's right. We tolerate theories that are not our own. Okay? And it seems to be against absolutism or against universalism, even though it's a bit of an absolute claim itself. Have you noticed that? The claim, you should be tolerant to everyone, is a universal claim.
I hate that I got
right? Is a universal claim. People should be tolerant is a universal claim. They mean that for everybody. No matter what theory they have, no matter what culture, what religion, they think that should be the case. That's a universal claim. But they also think that relativism is the only way to get that done. Okay? But relativism has some serious problems. So if you want to be tolerant and you feel like you have to be a relativist, that's a problem because relativism is terrible. Okay? Relativism is bad. Okay. Let's talk about a definition of tolerance. You've got two views. Okay? What most people go by now is the modern principle. Okay? The modern principle. But I'm going to show you there's two different versions of this. Okay? The modern principle says, this is like what we would think of now, okay? I hold that my view is correct. I mean, both of them start there, right? The next step is we have a different view, okay? Me and James, and so I say, James, your view has a right to be correct. I hold that my view is correct. I think I'm right. I also see that you have a right to be right, okay? So my response to that is, who's to say who's actually correct? I think I'm right. You think you're right, and you have a right to think that. Who's to say who's correct? And so we don't disagree. We just kind of, you're right in your thinking, I'm right in my thinking. We're not really disagreeing. We're just recognizing that our two different versions are both right. Okay? So therefore, since I don't disagree, I don't judge you because you're doing your thing. I'm doing me. Okay? Note, that's me tolerating you. Okay? And you tolerating me. This requires that we agree, or at least that we have this agnostic agreement. We don't know, so we just agree because we're not sure. who's right and who's wrong. So we're just going to kind of go, yeah, we're cool. Okay? The classic principle, though, the classic definition of tolerance, this is the modern principle is what it's become. Classic principle has always been, it starts in the same place, I'll hold that my view is correct. You, James, hold an opposite view from me, just like the other one. We disagree. Okay, at least we don't come to the same conclusion. We disagree under this theory. Okay, I'm going to say we disagree, and furthermore, because we disagree, and I think I'm right, that means that I think you're wrong. Okay, I think you're wrong. However, next step, I respect you and believe that you have the right not to be right, but you have the right to make your case. And I also understand that it's possible that I could be wrong. I think I'm right, but it's possible that I could be wrong. Okay? So this means that you and I disagree, and we both understand that we disagree. We're not on the same page. Okay? But there's a mutual respect there that says you can make your case, but also understand that I've made my case. We might not come to the same conclusion on this. However, we maintain respect for one another. That's tolerance. Okay, that's tolerance. I am tolerating an idea that I do not agree with. Does that make sense?
This only works with ideas and not truths, though, correct?
Well, because there's only one truth. Yeah. Now, one of us is true and one of us is not, if we have competing ideas, or we're both wrong.
I feel like nowadays we came back to the classic principle.
I think
Instead of now of the I respect you and believe you have the right to make your case, it's just like I'm right and you don't get to make a case.
yeah, we're almost there.
I believe that now.
Yeah, because we don't know how to argue, we don't know how to make our case, then we're just like, wow, we disagree.
Yeah.
So, which is not really tolerant, right? That's not really tolerance, okay? Tolerance involves, like, I respect you enough either to say we can't be friends, like, because otherwise we're just going to be disagreeing. Okay, I understand you have a viewpoint that's different than mine. I understand that you got there by good reason. I can't get there. I'm sorry, we can't hang out. Or it's not that big of a deal. I understand we're not on the same page. We can agree to disagree, but let it be known we disagree. I respect you. We can be friends, but we disagree. That's tolerance. I'm tolerating, right, an idea that I don't agree with. Okay, the modern principle. Okay, the modern principle does not require disagreement. The modern principle actually says, yeah, who's to say? Sure, we're both right. Let's be friends.
They're both agreeing that you each have a theory. They're not saying which is
Yeah, but
right.
it doesn't really go any further for that because that might involve some disagreement, right? It might involve some uncomfortable scenarios, and we don't really want to go there. Okay, it is icky. Yeah, you. Okay, so don't freak out. Okay, with all of these words. Just listen. Does relativism support tolerance under either definition?
No.
Okay, under either definition, yeah, probably, I'm going to argue for no, okay? The modern principle does not follow, let's take them one by one, from cultural relativism. Okay, let's take them one by one. If you're going to be a cultural relativist, you still can't, I'm not even going with the classical definition. I'll go with the modern definition, okay? You can't be tolerant under the modern principle of tolerance if you're a cultural relativist, because cultures differ, no recommendation follows. Just because cultures differ, no recommendation follows. So you can't be tolerant of anything because it doesn't tell you what to do in any scenario. Okay? There's nothing to tolerate. We can't be tolerant under the modern principle of tolerance under normative or metaethical, which we didn't really talk about, but normative relativism. Okay? Under normative relativism, one ought to be tolerant only if it's in your moral code to do so. Okay? And you ought to be intolerant if it's in your moral code to do so. So you don't have to be tolerant if you're a normative relativist, because what if your code says don't be tolerant? It's possible it could say that. Okay, you can't be tolerant under the modern principle of tolerance. You can. It does follow from combinatorial relativism. Remember the form and the plaster? Okay? You can be, but it's a vice instead of a virtue. Okay? Some lifestyles and choices are less valuable than others. I mean, think about it. I think I have later in here, if you decide to do with your life, like to go through and forward with your education and get a job and that kind of stuff, contribute to society, versus you decide with all of your faculties, like nothing, no defeaters, okay, You decide that you're going to spend your life pushing a wooden block around a room. There are some choices that are more valuable than others. Okay? And that might sound uncomfortable because we're like, well, you shouldn't judge if you really? Is that where we're at now? We think that somebody that's trying to invent something, let's say, or even just enter the workforce and become like a productive member of society is just as valuable as somebody pushing a wooden block around a room. Not talking about somebody who's mentally handicapped. I'm not talking about any of that. Okay? I'm talking about you. There are some choices and lifestyles that are going to be more valuable than others. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Not being judgmental, I'm just saying. Okay? Okay. So it becomes a vice instead of a virtue by merit of the fact that some lifestyles and choices are less valuable than others. We can't just tolerate that and be like, oh yeah, it's good. It's good. Because it's not good. You can't be tolerant under the modern principle of tolerance if you are an ethical skeptic. Because no moral duties whatsoever follow from ethical skepticism. Right? It doesn't tell you to be tolerant because it doesn't tell you anything. Okay? So, conclusion, tolerance is not supported by any relativistic theory. Even under the weaker one, the modern principle. Okay? You can't be tolerant and be a relativist. If you're going to be tolerant, that's cool. That's your thing. If that's what we're about now, that's cool. But I'm telling you, you can't be a relativist to be tolerant. Okay? So, that leads us into universalist ethics. 5 big theories. Okay? 5 big theories. Before we start, universalist has the one factor we've got that's the same in all these theories, just like relativism was the same in all the other theories, standards are going to be the same in all of these theories. Okay? You're going to have standards in all of these theories, and they're going to come from somewhere. Okay? Now let's talk about the necessity of standards. We do need standards they need to be real. Okay? The first reason is for order. Okay? If there were no standards, no rules, let's just take this classroom, no rules for class conduct, for example. Okay? It really was just a free-for-all. It would be chaos. Okay? Even if you were nice human beings and all sat down and mostly were quiet and stuff, there's still there's no telling, right? Attendance rules would be out the door, which some of you would be like, yes, please. Okay, there'd be there'd be nothing. It would be chaos. Okay? If there was chaos, there's no way that I could evaluate you. Right? If there's no standards, then everybody gets an A. And everybody gets an F.
What?
Right?
What?
Everybody gets all.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Okay? If everyone gets an A, that A is meaningless. Because how do you know? Well, I got an A in that class. Oh, nice. Well, everybody got an A. Right? No matter what they did. The person that was here 2 times got an A. Right? That makes that A meaningless. Okay? So you can't have, unless you have standards, different level standards to meet, then you can't evaluate anything. There can't be a higher or lower or anything like that. If there's no evaluation, there can be no distinction. There can't be a top of the class. There can't be a top 5%. Okay? There can't be any distinction because it's meaningless. There's nothing there. We can't evaluate you. I can say I like you, and I don't like you. I could, right? But that's about it. There can be no real evaluation, okay? No distinction. And if there's no distinction, there's no progress. Okay? If there's no distinction, there's no progress. So if there's nothing to shoot for, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. You know this. You've seen your grades at this point. You know where you're at. You know where you want to be. And so you do a little extra or whatever to try to figure out, okay, this is how I'm going to get there, right? That's because there are standards. Okay, so standards are really important for a lot of things, not just in a classroom, but in life. Okay? So, first theory, ethical egoism. Ethical egoism. What it is normative. Okay, meaning there is a rule that it's going to say that applies to everybody all the time. Okay? Each person, here's the rule. Each person has a duty to follow only those moral rules that will be in the agent's maximal self-interest in the long haul. Okay, please keep in mind these are lots of words, but they are really important. This definition is really important. Each person has a duty. Not you should, not you ought, but you have a duty. Okay, you have an obligation. to follow only the moral rules that will be in your maximal self-interest. Not like meh self-interest, but maximal self-interest, and not in the short run, in the long haul. Okay? So you have an obligation to do only those things that will provide you the greatest possible happiness in the long haul. Okay? Not you should, not it'd be a good idea, but that's your obligation. It's your only obligation. Okay? Moral rules that fit this criteria. Okay? Actions that fit this criteria are the correct ones in this theory. Okay? Actions that fit this criteria are the correct ones. Now, it's normative in the sense that this rule applies to everybody, they say. Right? So you should do what is in your maximal self-interest in the long haul. Tabitha, you should do what's in your maximal self-interest. You should do what's your maximal self-interest in the long haul. Right? Everybody should do what is in their maximal self-interest for the long haul. That make sense? Okay. Quick note on what it isn't. It is not, the rule is not, you should serve my self-interest. That would be nice, but it's not the rule. Okay? The rule is also not, I'm only able to do what best serves me. Okay, that's close, but that's not what this is. This one, psychological ethical egoism, says that's just how humans are wired. It's the only thing they can do. That becomes more of a descriptive view rather than a prescriptive view. It's just telling you what is, okay? But this one says you have an obligation to do those things, meaning it's possible you could not follow the obligation. This one says it's not possible. This is the only thing you can do. All the things we do are only to serve our best self-interest. And it's also not egotism, which just means I'm irritatingly narcissistic. Okay? That's not what this is. This is an ethical theory, not a really annoying behavior trait. Okay? Make sense? What this is asking? Here's some arguments. Just a second. Okay, we're just going to take argument 1 there for time's sake. Okay. Argument 1 says that psychological egoism, this one, I'm only able to do what best serves me, is actually true. Okay, this is what somebody who's arguing for this theory might say. Psychological egoism is true, my ethics follow from that. The problem is that psychological egoism is ambiguous. Okay, it's ambiguous. It deals more with, it has a problem between determining, like, the difference between the result of an action and the intent of an action. Okay? There also is a problem, here's the problem. If my happiness is the only result of my moral actions, then ethical egoism is irrelevant. If my happiness is the only intent of my moral actions, then this is false, because we do these things for the sake of other people all the time. Okay? It's not the case that we are hardwired to only do what best serves us, because there are examples all the time of things that we do for other people that are for our own harm. Okay? Having a child is a great example. Okay? I mean, Tabitha, you know, right?
Yeah.
Not just like the birthing process, but everything before that and after that. It's completely different. Your life is completely different, okay? And harder in a lot of ways, and better in a lot of ways. But we do things for the sake of other people all the time without a thought for ourselves or placing our own desires on the back burner. So that can't be true. That can't be true that psychological egoism is true and that we're hardwired. That we're hardwired to only do things in our self-interest. Now, some people might say, oh, even having kids, right, brings you such joy, and actually from an evolutionary standpoint, you're putting your DNA out there more often, so really it really is to your best interest because you're just trying to, like, make your line last longer.
No, like, people might argue that having a child is like making an investment, so you can, like, profit back.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband talks about that all the time with our 4-year-old. It's like, well, you're going to take care of me when I retire because.
Wow.
Yeah. And I say, no, I'm going to take care of you when you retire because I'll be working for forever.
Your husband has a very Asian mindset.
Mindset. Okay, Let's go on to this next one. This is the one we were kind of talking about with our moral dilemmas, okay, when we first started the class, with our moral dilemmas. Okay, so utilitarianism. Okay, utilitarianism. This one says that the rightness or wrongness of a moral rule is solely or only a matter of the non-moral good produced directly or indirectly in the consequences of the act or rule. Okay, that's really confusing, but basically it says the only thing that makes an action good, the only thing that makes an action good is the results of that action. And by results, it means non-moral results. So basically, are people alive? Are they happy? Okay, not are people then good people, or did other people then go and murder a bunch of people after that, or whatever. It's not talking about moral goods. It's just talking about non-moral goods. Okay, are people now fed? Do more people have money? Okay, non-moral goods. And it assesses, now think about this, it assesses the moral value of an action based only, this is the characteristic of the theory, based only on the results of that action. Not on the intent, not on the motive, not on the attitude, not on the context, only on the results. Okay? Another way of saying this is the greatest happiness for the greatest number, the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? That's kind of the slang way of saying this theory. So it operates on three basic principles. Number one, happiness is the only thing that is good in and of itself. The reason why is because, think about this. Why are you going to school?
Give my daughter a better life.
Why?
That's what's most important.
Why?
Because happiness.
Why?
Because happiness.
If you keep asking why, right, if you say like, okay, well, I go to get a job, let's say, right? Why? To get my daughter a better life. Why? Because then she'll be happier. Why? And at a certain point, when you get to the happy part, if it seems silly to ask why, right? You're like, what do you mean why? Why not? Why wouldn't you be happy, right? In the end, it all traces back to happiness, according to Aristotle, okay? And it kind of seems to ring true most of the time. In the end, there's at the very end of what you do, right? There may be several steps in there, but at the very end of what you do, it's always about some version of happiness. And I don't just mean like, I'm in a good mood right now. I mean like that deep contentment with life, right? At peace with life and yourself and other people, okay? So happiness is the only thing that's good in and of itself is the first principle. Okay, that's what it means, good in and of itself. You're not trying to be happy for another reason. You're just trying to be happy. Okay? The second principle is that no one's happiness is more valuable than anyone else's happiness. Okay? So we should seek, if that's true, if everybody's happiness is equal in value, then the right thing to do would be to seek the most people's happiness at a time. It's not like, well, the president's happiness is more than mine, or, my instructor's happiness is of greater value than mine, so I'm going to do things that seek their happiness at the expense of other people. No, it's saying that all humans' happiness is of the same value, and so we should seek the greatest number of happinesses in one fell swoop as we can. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's the third principle, is the only thing that can justify an action is the result of the action. The only thing that can justify an action is the result of the action. Again, not the motive, not the context, not the reasons why or anything like that. The result only. Does not care about your attitude. Okay, result only. So if the result is happiness, which is the greatest good, the only thing that's good in and of itself, then that means that action is good. Think about that for a second. If the result of your action is happiness, then that action is morally good. Taylor's like, Why did you say no?
Because, in my mind, I just think of, taking you could take something from one person and give it to another, and you would still make that other happy, but you're making this one person sad, but because you're making someone happy, it makes it
It's
okay.
the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
That just pisses me off.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's
there's
wrong,
still not a
okay?
positive result in the end. You say that one person happy, one person sad.
But as long as
Yeah.
this one, as long as
Right.
someone's happy, that's all.
Right. Right. So the bank thing from last week, remember the guy robbing the bank and giving it to the orphans? Okay. That becomes a morally right action. It's not just, well, in that instance, I could see why he did that. No, not that. More than that. Meaning that was morally the right thing to do. He ought to have done that. Okay?
So-
Based on the results only of his action.
Yeah.
Not the action itself, but the results of the action. So where I go is a little more twisted, right? I think of killing people.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say,
Okay.
is that if someone were to kill somebody and it makes them happy that they killed them, then that would be a morally right thing.
Yes, it
according
would, according to this theory.
No matter if the person you killed did right or wrong.
Correct.
Yeah,
Killing the
that
people, the
according to the theory in itself, wouldn't be the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
I mean,
It's still
Well, sure it would, because that
producing
person's dead,
happiness.
so now we're
Happiness
talking about
is
one
the
person that's happy.
only
Right.
Okay, now you're happy and his whole family's sad.
I mean,
Technically,
if
that's still
that
all good,
person
right?
is like hindering
Me and my family
the
have
lives
And
of
my family is one more person than that.
That's like military.
Well,
Do what,
It's
man?
like serving the military. Like you go kill other people in other countries, it's like more than right to kill them before you.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little more complicated when we talk about war and stuff like that, because there are different rules for war, and there's different opinions on whether or not killing in war is murder. That's a decent question. Yeah.
So are there any morals to war? Like
Are there any what?
morals to war? Like do the generals think about if it's morally
Oh
right?
yes.
when they
Oh,
make a decision?
there are big, like large, lengthy codes about what a just. Yeah, look up just war theory. Yeah, it's really really interesting. There are rules of engagement as well that are a little bit more like not as much strategy and more about tactics, but yeah,
Is it like you can't kill
what you can and cannot do. Yeah,
Yeah.
by civilians.
I heard in
Read,
Vietnam, I heard a story
Is that
that
wrong?
it was morally like looked down upon to shoot like field medics and people that were
Right.
unarmed and just
Right.
like nurses.
That's
trying
why
to
like
help people.
atrocities that happen like in Syria, for example, where they're bombing hospitals and stuff like that is like, I mean, that's where you get the phrase crimes against humanity. Because that's
Isn't that why we have war crimes? Because
Yeah.
war crimes.
That's why we can't use stuff like mustard gas because it's too inhumane.
Right, which again they do in Syria.
Any kind of biological warfare.
Shoot
Okay.
unarmed people.
So, in other
I think
words,
so. I think
to
it was
encapsulate
immoral
this
to shoot,
theory,
like, civilians.
we got to keep
I'm
going
sure.
because we got lots of stuff to cover. So, to encapsulate this theory, the end justifies the means, okay, or the greatest good for the greatest number. That's the way you can remember this theory. Okay, the end justifies the means, or the greatest good for the greatest number, or both. Okay. Here's we're going to do a little bit of assessment of this theory because this is one of the biggest theories. I mean, think about it. And when my questions with you guys with the moral dilemmas, that's where you went first, right? Was, well, I've got 5 people on this track and 1 person on this track, and, right? I mean, it's where a lot of people go, okay? Because in one sense, it seems easy because we know that, like, well, a life is valuable, but like more lives are valuable than just one life, and so, right? We kind of go there, and it leads to some problems, but at least that's where we go first, it seems like. So here's some major factors to consider. You don't have to write all this down if you don't want to. So major factors to consider. One of the biggest problems with utilitarianism is that philosophers do not, even utilitarians, don't agree on what is the principle of utility. Like, on what is, when we say greatest good, what exactly do we mean? They don't agree. And in fact, they come up with 6 different versions. So by greatest good, do we mean it produces only good consequences? So you're looking for the action that produces only good consequences and 0 bad consequences. Is that the one? Or is it the one that maximizes good consequences? Maybe there's a few bad ones in there, but way more benefit than harm. Or is it the one that just avoids all bad consequences? We're not really concerned with how much good, we're just concerned with avoiding the bad. So neutral maybe, okay? Or does it minimize bad consequences? We're just focused on containing the damage, okay? Or is it that it produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people involved or affected? Or does it maximize the net balance of good and bad,
So it's like
benefit and harm? Yeah. Or, no, that's all. Okay? There are 6 of them, and they don't agree, and these are all really different, right? I mean, they're kind of shades of the same thing, but when you get down to it, like producing only good consequences or minimizing bad consequences are very different approaches, right? And then one of the big problems is that they don't agree with what exactly we're talking about when we talk about greatest good for the greatest number.
But isn't like maximizing the good consequences kind of similar to minimizing bad consequences?
Yeah, except for the focus, right? The focus they wouldn't really care about the good consequences here. They'd just be trying to minimize the bad ones. So they'd be more focused on the bad ones and trying to make them smaller than in producing good ones. So you might end up with some neutral stuff in there because you're not really focused on the good. Yeah. Okay. So utilitarianism operates on this basic premise that the greatest good is happiness, like we talked about before. According to Aristotle, everything we choose for the sake of something else except for happiness. That's what I talked about before, right? When I asked why? Well, when we get to the end, it's because we want to be happy. Why? Because we do. That's a stupid question, right? That's what Aristotle thought. And so he also thought that acts are only good in the sense that they ultimately lead to happiness. Because it's the only thing that we choose for the sake of itself, okay, then all acts that lead to that are going to be morally good acts. All right? And then for the greatest number, I mean, in my mind, it's better than egoism, which is just concerned with you, right? Because look, what could be in your greatest maximal self-interest, like, is going to be different than mine. And it might actually be opposite of mine. So if we're both after our maximal self-interest in the long haul, you and me are going to be fighting, right? But under egoism, that's not an option. Like, we're both supposed to do that, so either that pits us all against each other, or it isolates us all so we can get out of each other's way. Okay, that does not seem to produce a healthy and happy society. Okay, so this way it does seem to be better than egoism because it involves more people and thoughts about more people. But it does imply that some won't get their way, right? When we say greatest happiness for the greatest number, that still means that a small number, right, the smaller number, is not going to be happy. Okay, so it still implies that there's going to be people that don't get their way, and utilitarians have an answer for that. They say, but that builds character. When you don't get your way, that actually builds, long suffering and patience and perseverance and courage, and ultimately, that leads to happiness. So really, they're happy too, just in a more roundabout way. Sacrifice leads to happiness, ultimately, is their claim. So even the small number, they may have a longer road to happiness, right, because they got caught on this detour, but they're going to get there eventually. Okay? Does that make sense? I watched today, so we'll try to... Oh my goodness, no! We do positive points and negative points really quick.
Shoot.
I know
Go
I'm
for it.
Please.
I don't have a class
No.
for this.
I have
Wasting time.
You what?
I have word.
I have lunch.
Okay, really quick. Okay, so just so that we don't have to remind ourselves of this later. Okay, so positive points to utilitarianism, it does link the moral good to happiness. That does seem to be a good thing, right? If you're morally good, you should be happy, life should be good. And the link between the two, I think, is a healthy one. It is results-oriented, which means we can assess it really easy, right? We can look at what happens and we go, okay, that was definitely good. Nope, that was bad. That was good, because it's results-oriented. It's very versatile. It can be applied to different moral problems. And then it does seem to balance your personal desires with your social obligations because it takes into account more people, okay? These are good things about it. Bad things about it is, look, how can you really know what's going to happen? How can you really know what's going to happen with a particular action before it takes place?
Yeah.
Right? There's no way to really know. You can be darn sure, but you can't really know. You guys know about knowledge now, right?
Yeah.
You can't really know before it happens. So how are you supposed to do the right thing when you're only basing it on the results? You got to know the results before you do it, but how can you know that? Right? That's a serious problem. How do we compare results? Really? Are we just going to count people and say, well, there's 17 here and 16 here, so mine's the morally gooder one? right? I mean, that's a problem. What about other virtues? Okay, other than sacrifice, what about other things that we're supposed to like cultivate in ourselves rather than just like result stuff? What about that? Okay, and then also, does motive count for anything? Not in this theory, but it seems like in our life it really does, right? Motive is really important to us, but it holds zero place in utilitarianism. Okay, they're not concerned about motive, only concerned about results. Okay, done. 3x5 chrono, please. All right. And you'll have another one on Wednesday, so check Blackboard.
You'll find this out whenever I grade it, but I'm behind the card.